The grand hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers and sparkling decorations, but the warmth of the room didn't reach me. As I walked down the aisle in my simple wedding dress, I could feel their eyes on me, my soon-to-be husband's family. Whispers floated around, barely disguised, and the corners of their mouths curled in amusement as if my presence was some kind of joke. I tried to smile, tried to ignore it, but every laugh and glance cut deeper than I expected. I had dreamed of this day for years, imagining love, respect, and celebration, yet here I was, feeling smaller than ever. The rich groom, my husband to-be, looked embarrassed, shifting nervously as his relatives exchanged pointed comments about my humble background and plain appearance. It was almost surreal how they judged me without knowing anything about who I truly was. But I stayed calm, reminding myself that love was stronger than cruelty. Still, the tension was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from over, just as I was gathering the courage to face them with dignity. The faint rumble of a limousine outside caught everyone's attention. Conversations paused, laughter died down, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. The air was thick with curiosity and unease. I didn't know it yet, but this car was carrying someone who would change everything, the one person whose arrival could turn mockery into shock, and awkward glances into stunned silence. What would happen next? I could only wait, heart pounding, as the doors slowly opened. The limousine doors opened slowly, and a hush fell over the hall. I felt my stomach tighten, a strange mix of fear and anticipation coursing through me. Out stepped a tall man in a tailored suit, his presence commanding yet calm. The room seemed to shrink around him, and the whispers stopped as everyone tried to process who he was. My father? But not just my father, the man who had quietly built his fortune from nothing. The one whose reputation in business circles was enough to make anyone stop and take notice. Growing up, he had always been a man of humility, teaching me to value hard work and kindness over wealth. Most people only saw him as quiet and unassuming, but I had grown up knowing just how sharp, resourceful, and influential he truly was. And now, standing there in that gleaming limousine, he carried the aura of someone who could command attention without even speaking. The Groom's family stiffened, exchanging uneasy glances. I could feel the tension in the room spike, the mockery fading into an uncomfortable silence. My husband looked at me with a mix of confusion and fear, as if realizing that the world he had carefully built to feel safe for himself was about to be turned upside down. I took a deep breath, unsure of what my father planned to do, but feeling a surge of courage. Whatever happened next, it would change the night forever. And as the limousine doors closed behind him, the room held its collective breath, waiting for the storm that was about to hit. The room was thick with tension, and every eye was on my father. He moved with a calm authority, but I could see the sharp glint in his eyes, a warning that he wasn't someone to underestimate. The Groom's family fidgeted, some straightening their ties, others whispering urgently among themselves. Their earlier confidence, the smugness that had made me feel so small, was now cracking under an invisible pressure. I glanced at my husband. He seemed torn between loyalty to his family and the growing unease that something about me, about my background, was far more complicated than he had imagined. I could see the doubt flicker across his face, the uncertainty that he hadn't shown all night. It made my heart race. This was no longer just a wedding. It was a turning point where the truth was starting to surface, piece by piece. Meanwhile, the family's matriarch, my groom's aunt, attempted to regain control. She straightened her pearls, her voice cutting through the silence as she made a pointed remark about appearances and suitable matches. But my father didn't flinch. His presence alone seemed to press against their shallow judgments, highlighting every lie they had whispered about me. In that moment, I realized that this night wasn't just about me proving myself. It was about every secret, every assumption, and every judgment being questioned. The whispers grew into cautious murmurs as relatives tried to gauge his reaction, unaware that his influence extended far beyond their wealth and social standing. And as I stood there, heart pounding, I knew the storm was only beginning. The confrontation was inevitable, and the truth about who I really was who my family really was about to change everything. The room seemed to shrink as the tension thickened, every corner filled with a mix of anticipation and fear. My father didn't speak, but his gaze alone made the Groom's family shift uncomfortably in their seats. The murmurs that had started again were now tinged with worry, as if they suddenly realized that their jokes and judgment had consequences far beyond what they imagined. I could feel my own heartbeat echoing in my chest, a steady drum of nervous excitement and dread. My husband looked at me with wide eyes, a question unspoken lingering between us. Could he even begin to understand the world I had grown up in, or the power my father quietly wielded? There was no malice in my father's expression, only the calm, controlled force of someone who knew exactly how much weight his presence carried. Suddenly, the Groom's father rose from his chair, trying to assert dominance, his voice shaking slightly as he made a pointed comment about family status and propriety. The words hung in the air, heavy and cutting, but instead of flinching, my father stepped forward. The room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone could feel the collision of world's mockery and entitlement facing quiet authority and undeniable influence. I glanced around, noticing the subtle shifts, servants pausing mid-step, relatives exchanging panicked glances, even the groom gripping his hands tightly, struggling to keep composed. Something monumental was about to happen, something that would expose hidden truths, challenge their arrogance, and test the bonds of respect and love. And as my father took one deliberate step closer, the silence was deafening, every eye locked on him, every mind waiting for the moment that would change everything in that hall, just as the tension seemed unbearable. The doors at the back of the hall burst open again, and a new figure appeared, my younger brother, someone no one in the Groom's family had ever heard of. He was holding a small, sleek tablet and, with a confident smile, began to play a video. The room fell completely silent. On the screen were images and clips that no one expected. Our family's achievements, our business ventures, and even charitable projects that had quietly made headlines overseas. It was a side of us that the Groom's family had never seen, a side that completely contradicted every assumption they had made about my humble background. The Groom's relatives froze. Some turned pale, others fumbled with their words, and I could see the flush of embarrassment creeping across their faces. The whispers and snickers that had haunted me all night were gone, replaced with stunned silence and a palpable sense of panic. My father's calm presence now had a partner proof that spoke louder than any reprimand could. Meanwhile, my husband's eyes widened in disbelief. He had thought he knew the full story about me, about my life and family, but this revelation cracked open everything he believed. Even the most confident members of his family seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth. I could see the shifting alliances, the subtle glances exchanged between them, each trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation they had no longer mastered. I gripped my bouquet tightly, heart racing, realizing that the night had transformed into more than a wedding. It had become a stage where pride, secrecy, and assumptions were being exposed, and the climax was inching closer with every passing second. The hall was electric with tension as the video ended, leaving the Groom's family speechless. My father stepped forward, his calm authority now amplified by the proof my brother had shown. He didn't need to say much. Every glance, every gesture made it clear that their mockery had been not only misplaced but utterly foolish. I felt a surge of pride and relief, knowing that the truth about who I really was, and the strength of my family was finally undeniable. My husband, still wide-eyed, reached for my hand. There was a shift in him, a recognition that the person he was marrying was far more remarkable than he had realized. Even the groom's father, the man who had been so arrogant moments ago, now looked at me with a mixture of respect and caution. The air was thick with the realization that this wedding would no longer follow their script of control and judgment. Then, just as the tension began to settle and I thought the night had reached its peak, the unexpected happened. A soft chime came from the corner of the hall. My father's assistant had entered, holding an envelope addressed to the groom's family. Inside were contracts and deeds showing that, unbeknownst to anyone, my father's company had been quietly acquiring a significant stake in theirs. The power balance had shifted entirely, and the smug expressions of the relatives were replaced by shock and disbelief. I squeezed my husband's hand tighter, heart racing with a mixture of triumph and astonishment. What started as a night of mockery and doubt had transformed into a revelation that no one could ignore. And as the room buzzed with whispered realizations and stunned silence, I knew one thing for certain: nothing, not even appearances or wealth, could ever undermine the truth again.